you stumble upon an object, and because you stumble upon that object, the story then moves into another direction.
We need to have surprises in stories that engage.
Programs which were focusing on a kind of literary fiction alone.
Writing was the only thing that I could do to get over the grief.
From very ancient times, I think people had a very deep relationship with objects.
By looking into the detail, we can find all kinds of things that we didn't expect.
Thought-provoking insights sparking intellectual curiosity. Tune in, transcend the ordinary, and get nuanced.
Hello everybody to this fresh episode, and we are in this November afternoon, shall I say. The weather is not exactly gloomy, and with me I have Alison. Alison Boyle is a writer, and she's come visiting India, and she's in Bangalore for the Bangalore Literary Festival. But more importantly, we are very lucky to have her here for a workshop with our students of MA Creative Writing. And the students just got done with their workshop, and they're still ruminating over it. And meanwhile, we thought we'll catch up with Alison to talk more about her work. Especially this book, which is called exObjects, which inspired this workshop, and I thought that this was a great theme to begin with, because like we were just discussing, Alison, maybe we'll jump right into that and then find a way of talking about your journey through that, right? Rather than starting from your journey. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what you were talking about, the relationship with objects in an age when otherwise digitization and the datafication of our memories often tempts us to believe that having memories on the computer is enough to have a memory. So in that kind of a context, shall I say, which none of us can ignore, what made you and Shiny think about this project? If you could maybe tell us more about it.
It's an interesting question, because in the age when there was less content, of course, people they had objects. They might have decorative objects, they might have some jewelry, they might have, some books, but they had fewer things. Now there's a plethora of content, and we only have the same amount of time to spend on leisure time, when we're not working. And you need scrutiny, you need to spend time, detailed time, thinking and looking at something in order to really understand, maybe its physical characteristics, if it's a complex piece, but also what it represents. And what I found, having inherited some objects that I didn't know about, they weren't around in my childhood, they were surprises, they were new things, they felt contemporary. So they were within this digital space where you do have thousands of hours of all kinds of content. These things sort of shone as gems because they were personal references to me. And I think we can, if we have the focus, we can curate the things that we're going to look into the detail of. And by looking into the detail, we can find all kinds of things that we didn't expect. So for the exObjects, it's using an object as the nexus of emotions that are brought to us through the conversations, the people who are associated with that object, or they might be a person themselves who is seen in the contemporary context. So they've got the spotlight on them. Amongst all the things that we could see, these are the ones that have the spotlight.
Yeah. And I was just, if I may take a small digression, and I was thinking about the role objects have in narratives in general, right? I mean, maybe we can go back to the idea of object in mythical terms, like, or think of those objects which are attributed magical powers, like, for example, you have stories with a magical ring. If you wear the ring, you acquire magical powers, and or a magical hat. If you wear the hat, you acquire certain powers, so on and so forth. Which means that at that level, I think even in our oral storytelling, even from very ancient times, I think people had a very, if you like, a very deep relationship with objects, which perhaps, ironically, in a way, more and more materialistic world is actually dying, right? But even apart from that, if you look at how objects can turn your attention to a completely different direction. Like, for example, you have these stories where you stumble upon an object, and because you stumble upon that object, the story then moves into another direction, right? So, I mean, is that also an imagination of objects that plays into what you call this nexus of emotions and people and places?
I think the happenstance of discovering objects is really important, and I think it's important for stories because we need to have surprises in stories that engage. We need to feel that we've encountered something that we haven't seen before or heard before or has been rendered in that way before. So certainly some of the stories that your students were writing today were really things that they hadn't engaged with particularly before, but they had somehow acquired them. And in acquiring them, they had to look at them and they had to think, what does this mean to me? Is this valuable? What references does it have? I haven't got space in my cupboard, all these things. How useful is it? Because the useful test is quite important if we've got limited space and limited time. We can't keep everything, which goes back to your reference to the computer age. But in the simplest object, like an umbrella, one of your students was talking about an umbrella, which was actually really loved by his mum. And when he came to college, she gave it to him. And you would pay not very much for that umbrella, but of course it's imbued with significance because his mum really liked it and used it over those many years, but she wanted him to have it. So with that was all the emotional embrace, a gift to a son, a protective enclosure, a sort of, umbrellas are protective anyway, aren't they? So they've got the metaphor there, and we've got the sort of, as you say, the symbolic stones or the items that we use to create stories about how we socialise, what's important to us, and how we connect with other people. I think the connection with other people part is really the centre of exObjects. We have an object which is the nexus it's the meeting point and the channeling for so many different worlds. So I'm wearing a ring now, which is an Indian sapphire. But it was owned by my grandmother, who was a weaver, a cotton weaver. And she ran 4 looms. And it was an eternity ring that her son, my dad, was asked to get from India to say, we're still, with my granddad, we're still together. But when he died, she probably felt that there was a continuum, a sort of better chance that it continued in life if she gave it to me, and I'm her only granddaughter. So she just gave it to me one day over a meal, and it fitted me perfectly, and I've been wearing it ever since. So this ring obviously has all these dimensions to it. And if I write about it, I can explain some of those dimensions, but I need to do it in a way that is also interesting for people who didn't know my family, who didn't know the circumstances of the factory where she worked and what those social settings were. And I need to be thinking, as I try to do with the last story in the book, actually, I try to bring the ring as a connection between India and my family's past, and my grandmother, who knew nothing at all about travelling. She never travelled, but I can, because I've spent the time thinking about it, I can add those things for other people, and I hope they'll embrace some of it. They won't pick up on all of it, but there are other stories in there that use objects in the ways that might resonate more with other readers. But we've all, I think, been quite personal and exposed things about our lives which we hope will be universal, but through an individual object.
Because you talked about objects and how they bring people together or are the meeting ground for different kinds of people, one definite theme that has been arising in conversations that we are having. Last couple of weeks back, we had this American artist. Her name is Heather Letton. She's an artist at the University of Rochester. One discussion I had with her was that when she pursues art, because at least when I was younger, I was exposed to a very individualistic idea of what an artist should be, like Van Gogh, for example. The artist who withdraws from the world, from the community, so to speak, and then comes up with a work of art, right? As opposed to that, a very different idea of art, which is decidedly about engagement with people and community, right? I mean, and that's a sense that I got from her, who, by the way, she's a great artist. Her installations are, and are driven around concepts which are very, very interesting. While at the same time, at the end of the day, the point is, do they make readers or other participants in that work of art really think? And it is, in some sense, a very an idea of art that is filled with a kind of generosity, right? Rather than of everybody. Meaning, like as I would imagine that this exercise around objects is not something that our creative writing students would like alone. It's even younger people, even people in school would love to go through an exercise like that, right? So, and I imagine this idea of engaging continuously with the community, with people around you, seems to be somewhere a kind of a theme, right? Because you could have also chosen to be, like I said, a very different kind of an artist, a different kind of writer. But this is a particular mode of engagement that you choose to be. Like, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that's perceptive, and it relates to the reason why I started exObjects. It came from my parents' deaths in COVID times, which were very, very difficult circumstances. I mean, death is always difficult, but they had been married for 70 years nearly, and they were good people, and they died in very difficult circumstances within 6 months of one another. So that we were presented with all these possessions and a gap. But what they were very generous people, and I think that although I had to write my own story, because if we're writers, we've still got to be motivated by the things that are important to us. There is a porosity, there's an openness. So although I write my objects, I also think it's really important to present the concept of exObjects to people as an opportunity to write hopefully, to write with hope.
Yeah.
So I did it because writing was the only thing that I could do to get over the grief. But then when you are in that state, it's important that you find happiness and hope and create a different future for yourself and a present. But look into the future. So I think that you can do that by quite an active approach to life and perspectives. And I think if you present people with the thought that they can write imaginatively, so it could be that the facts of their lives are quite difficult, or there's something that they're finding they can't get over. Actually, the imagination can take you anywhere. And if you put some quite, colourful writing or, quite emotional perspectives into it, actually you can create another kind of possibility for yourself. And I do hear quite a lot that people who have written exObjects, including the young writers who are published in that book and in the workshops, that they have moved beyond something, even if it's only marginally, the thought that they can move beyond if they spend more time. Because we each need to spend the time individually, but as a group, we can learn from each other's perspectives on each other's objects and each other's ways of articulating why that object moves beyond the personal into these potentially universal ways of connecting with people.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, when you talked about writing with hope, that is certainly, it requires, I think, I often meet artists who rather embrace darkness, darkness or some kind of a cynicism, not even cynicism, but some melancholia, if you like. As opposed to that, I almost think of this process as you describe it, as something that is intending to be therapeutic, if you like, to put it in a slightly caricatured way, but still. And I think that's a very refreshing idea because for sure, I think one problem that we are facing is how to make creative writing relevant for people, right? Because and I'm probably digressing here, but the genesis of creative writing is often associated with programs which were focusing on a kind of literary fiction alone. But now there is a sense that the ambit of what creative writings programs intend to do should generally just expand to include all forms of communicating, right? And communicating in ways that maximum number of people can be embraced and included into that conversation. That's definitely true. Having said that, if you could tell me a little bit about other writers or other artists, it need not even be a writer. It could be, because I understand that you do workshops which combine also some kind of performances. So it's not limited to the written word in any strict sense. Who have been some either great or less well-known artists of the past who have inspired you to think maybe not just particularly about exObjects, but even in other kinds of writing that you have done. And maybe through that you can speak about other work that you have also done. Right? Because that is something that, one of the things that we try to do is tell students about the influences which writers have had. And they can be very dynamic. Writers can be influenced by all sorts of things. They can be influenced by cinema, other writers, cartoonists, whatnot, right? They can be inspired by a sports person for that matter. So what would you count as your influences, if you could reveal a bit of that?
Just picking up on your contemporary point, it does need to resonate with the world as it is. And some classical ideas, established art, is overlooked because it's, other things have just been looked at more. But actually, I discovered Horace, the writer, classical writer, Roman writer, and what appeals to me about him is his very colloquial style. He's translated by an very talented Irish translator, so I rely, because I don't read it in the original language, I rely on the personality of that translator who allowed me to read Horace as he is. He's funny, the other part of being hopeful, try and see the light side, try and be funny, try and be witty in your writing, take away the gloom, give us light and shade. That's good, persuasive writing. So I would say that working on this book with Shiny, Shiny is very talented at bringing humour and self-deprecating humour, dry wit into the writing. So I would say that that's something that I find appealing. I think it's quite hard to do, but it can make it appeal to more people than just being about myself. As you say, life memoir. This is kind of memoir, but I'm trying to encourage people to move beyond. This is just a diary about myself, because actually only you might be interested in reading your diary. I would say an artist that inspires is actually Rothko. Rothko with a very strong balance of colour. Mark Rothko. Yeah. Which my family love. And we went to see an exhibition in London. But what's interesting about him, and I think here's the metaphor for exObjects, is that you look at the canvases and you see maybe two colours broadly. But the way he layered those colours, maybe 13, 14, 15, many more, he would mix different colours, he'd thin them down. And what you're seeing is a grand, epic, usually quite big, it catches your attention, great for marketing, great for anybody to catch those audiences. But actually, when you look closely and you look underneath at the way the artist talks about his work, where you find revealed the subtleties, that's where it becomes your curiosity is excited and you want to know more. And so we actually, during lockdown, when I was grieving for my parents, we actually did 2 huge oil paintings as a family. We hadn't to go out of our house at certain points in England because of the infection. We got some oil paints and we created 2 Rothko-style canvases as a family, collaborative painting, which, I'm sure he would not have agreed with that way of painting. I'm sure he just painted for, himself privately. But that inspires me because I think it's very, eye-catching. There's a lot that you are asked questions about, and that's what we've tried to do. We've said in the book that we want the reader to be asking questions of themselves by reading these stories. Was the right decision made about an object? And hopefully that would lead them into perhaps writing their own exObject stories, even very short things.
Sure. I think this would be a good moment for us to probably open up the conversation and maybe have some of our students to ask certain questions. So
the only question I had was, I didn't understand the concept of the object being something intangible. How do you explain that?
Yeah. For example, if you had an aspiration to do something in your life, that is an object of focus.
Object of focus, okay.
Yes. And if you then, through the exObjects format of writing, if you then started thinking about, say, say if you wanted to be a philosopher, okay, right? So you would be doing a lot of thinking about that anyway, given what it is. But you felt disappointed because you weren't a philosopher yet, say. So it was a loss, but you somehow, for whatever reason, maybe you'd met somebody inspiring, you'd seen something on television, you'd read something. That's what you wanted to do. It was an object of your focus. It's intangible in some ways because we can't pick it up. But on the other hand, it's so real to you because it's driving what you want to. It's making you seek out people, it's making you look more closely, it's making you really ask questions. How can I make this happen? And so when you do that, and maybe it's actually could be through fiction writing, you imagine a character who has done that, and then that can then have a positive wave back to where you are in your life because it's giving you a different perspective. So the whole point of this is you use your imagination, use your writing skill, the power of words that you've got, your metaphor, to make it tangible. But the X bit is the loss, it's the thing that's missing. But sometimes when things are missing, actually, then we have a desire to fill that gap, and that makes us ask questions, and that's good because then it keeps us curious, doesn't it? Does that help?
Yeah, that does help because I was not able to figure out how you would keep something like an achievement or an objective, and how you would, like, if I didn't have an object to speak about, how I would describe the way that I did in class the writing.
Well, what you can do is you can assign an object to something intangible. So, for example, if you saw somebody, maybe it's just a photograph of the person that you would like to follow in their professional path or something, that can be a physical object, can't it? But it's still representing all the things that are going on in your mind and your aspirations. Because I can see it helps to have something tangible. But sometimes we've lost those things. We, maybe a really precious thing that our parents had or something else is lost, but actually it's still part of our lives, isn't it? We remember what people said about it. We remember when we saw it in sunlight or nighttime, or it was moved to that shelf. It's still there, even though that is intangible. But we can make it tangible in a different way through our writings, what are unique ways that we can add to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So what I wanted to ask you, it's with regards to The Typing Man, a book that you wrote, right? And as I understand it, you spent about 3 years writing it, if I'm not wrong. So one side is in Turkish entirely, and the other is in English, the exact same translation, more or less.
Yes.
So what I wanted to ask is something like this. What is is it experimental? Was it done before? What was your thought process? What was the creative process even?
In having the dual language story, yeah. It has been done before. I would say it's not a popular thing to do. The reason I did it, I don't speak Turkish, and I'm an English person. I'm terribly bad at learning other languages. I do speak 2 other European languages, not very well. I found Turkish really hard, but when we went to Turkey, I loved it. I loved it like India. There's just something about the colours and the people and the vibrancy, the way that people were interacting. There's just something that immediately I loved, and I wanted to try and capture that. I wanted to try and capture my view of that, of an incident in a park, actually, where we are now, where we just walked in and there was a man at a table typing, and somebody came up to him and then somebody else did. I knew nothing about typing people, because even then people did generally have typewriters, computers. So it came from a question: what is this man doing? What is he doing in Istanbul in particular? And what is he saying? And I felt there was a big world there, and I knew nothing about it, or relatively little. I mean, we've been to Istanbul and travelled in Turkey quite a lot. I was interested in the language, so I worked with a Turkish woman, person who'd been born in Istanbul, who helped me with she did the translation. We had another person translating and checking and proofreading. So I'm confident that they did that job really well. But what she told me as well was, so at the end of so why did it take me so long to write? It was kind of your question. Because that's how long it took me to feel happy with it. It was a short story. I entered it to a competition. I'd never entered any competitions like that before, and it was shortlisted for an award. And I then decided that there were many things that were missing from it, which was the Turkish. It was my view of it, but where was the Turkish? So that's when I worked on that part of it. We had Turkish Arabic names. It's quite a political book. There is a careful choice of names of characters which relate to historical ones. It's quite lightly dealt with, but I know about that through some children's books that I was doing with a Turkish publisher. And so one of the people who wrote those books I made into a character in this book. So I kind of know about that, which is what I was saying in the workshop. There are things that you bring to a story, you don't necessarily explain everything. And then we have the Turkish names, which Kemal Ataturk changed his country quite radically. And he expunged some of the Arabic names in the Arabic language. And so I had picked up from my Turkish friends that because the names we're given at birth and our language explains our culture. And it's the way we operate. And she felt that quite a lot had been lost by losing that language. So I then decided to make more. So as a rebel, I made more of the names, and we have the phonetics that were enabling non-Turkish speakers like me to pronounce them. And then we've had a series of workshops and a performance, which I then did, where I was the narrator, and young people like you took on roles, not really a scripted. I did rewrite it as a script, but it was more a perambulation, recreating the scene in the park with light show and with sound and the clock that tolls. The clock is very important in that book. And so we we did that performance. So the whole thing took quite a long time, but that's the rounded story.
It's lovely. it's lovely to know what goes on like behind the creation of a book, right? Plus, especially when you mentioned about that it took you 3 years because you wanted to be happy with it.
Yes.
I guess that's a big part of the creative process as well. You write until you are happy with what you've done.
And you're really sick of it. You don't want to read it again, but you can improve it maybe. And then there's a point where you just say, no, that's when I need to send it off, because it's really dangerous if you just hold on to it, because then no one will have a chance to see it. Yeah. So keep on, writing and showing it to people. Yes.
So I heard you put a lot of effort into the production of a book. Like when the exObject came out, you were very interested in how the book was supposed to be, like the width, the color of the pages. Not every author or not every writer does that. So do you think it's important for a person to be attached to how their book is going to turn out to be like?
Yeah, good question. I think it depends on who you are as a writer. I've always been involved with producing books as well, so I knew what was possible.
Okay.
And so I could ask questions, maybe, I know, could we try this, could we have that? But to me, it feels important to, when we are reading, to hold the book. Yes. And as Shiny, the co-editor, said, this is an object in itself. Yeah. And because we were able, through the publisher on publishing, to have these colour pictures, mm-hmm. Yeah. This also makes it something that you might want to pick up and enjoy the hardback, and enjoy the, we talked a lot about the margins being very readable and spacious, and the importance for the reader to find a place in the book. Yes. To in the interactions with the stories, we wanted it to have space.
Yeah, I think it's very important for a reader to have an interaction with the book itself, to connect with the story or connect with what's behind it. So do you think, like me as an author, what would you suggest me to do? Like if you're giving me a suggestion or giving me an idea about how I should turn a book into, like how it should, it should come out like.
You mean if you have your own story?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you can do things yourself, obviously, very easily now. With great printers and obviously design packages. This was a book that I brought out. We had a designer to do some of the work on it.
The one with the double language, the two languages.
So we have and also this, because this is a spinning top that I saw being spun outside a mosque in Istanbul. Yeah. And so we wanted the journey. This is words within the story, the spinning top's route across the cover. So we did think about that. And my dad actually helped me to choose the background, and my daughter the background colour of the card. Yeah. So it was the richness of the blue. It was next to the blue mosque in Istanbul.
Yeah.
So that was important. So we produced it, and obviously we commissioned these illustrations here. Yeah. So you can have control over some things, but if it's a big publisher who's taking your writing, then you maybe not have as much control over it. So it depends about the route that you're taking.
Which one was more fun, the production or the writing?
I do really I'm a very visual person as well. Yes, I do really see it as a whole.
Oh, okay.
And because they are objects, they're physical and visual.
Yeah.
It's very integrated in this book, and also I feel with that.
Yeah.
So are you a visual person?
I am a very visual person. More than a plain book, I would love to interact with the book more.
Yeah.
So I found it very interesting. Even the typing man, I've heard about it a lot. My friends were just talking about it. So I found it really interesting how you were able to connect what you wrote to how the book turned out to be. Yeah. It's very interesting.
I think it might be related to having written a lot of picture books, because I don't illustrate, although I do some artwork, I don't illustrate figuratively. So I worked with an illustrator, but I would always have to think, how does my story, because I would create the world and the characters and do little doodles and make a little dummy book to show how one moved on from the other. The illustrator would add their amazing brilliance at illustrating, adding their own ideas. what you do with that age group is that you add little secrets into the pictures.
Yeah.
Little things that you can come back to you hadn't seen when you were 3, but you saw when you were 5.
Yeah.
You know, and then when you're 15, you understand there's another layer. So I think it's probably very closely related to layering your stories and layering the way that you communicate, actually, whether it's through written word or visuals or sound, movement. Having the ideas in the starting point, really. You know, if you've got a rich idea, it's got many angles to it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And if you can manage to, it's a hard thing because there's so many stages. By the time it comes to the end, there have to be compromises.
Yes.
But then if you're disappointed, you say, okay, next time, the next one we'll do some more of those things that I didn't manage to do. So you have to, if you keep making, then you keep making opportunities.
So on that note, Alison, we come to the end of our conversation here, which I think is just a spark for future conversations on these kind of topics. But no such conversation with a writer is complete without the writer herself reading out some stuff from the work. So I'd be very happy if you give us a glimpse of some sort of few words from the exObjects.
Thank you. So this is the book. It's exObjects. It's being launched at Bangalore Literature Festival in the middle of December. I'll just read you a little bit from the introduction, which talks about the objects and what they represent. Running through the collection is compassion. All of our chosen objects serve as a nexus of the emotional interactions that bind us to people and place. Some objects accumulate importance over the years, but an object discovered will not always result in wish to keep it. And these stories throw up challenges that will hopefully push readers towards puzzlements of their own. I'll just read you a little bit from the story that started it all, which is with a sugar dove, which is this tiny, from a wedding cake that I found in the top of the wardrobe when my mum died. And I found that I was in the same room as her. I just felt her presence without believing in ghosts. So here we are. We're sitting on the bed and I'm looking at this little dove. Loosening the wire around the neck of the bag sets us on a different course from mother, carer, daughter. Like the best of companions, meeting for mid-morning coffee. With a tremor of excitement, we perch the naked dove on the eiderdown between us, ready to share in something new. I may even get to hear one of your secrets. We sit at once present and absent, looking at the footless bird. Designed to be stuck in a bright white rink of royal icing, it rolls in my direction. It seems forlorn, separated from its familiars, the baker's familiar kitchen. But we rediscovered it. We cradle the dove in interlapping palms, shocked by the spread of cold across our skin, trying to remember why we kept it. Before I entered the room, your legacy appeared intangible, but I can see that spending time with you this way helps with definition. A cake was never needed for liftoff. Your footless sugar and water bird was not designed to fly.